Welcome along to Trip Notes. It's a New Zealand Herald travel podcast brought to you by Intrepid Travel. And we take you around the world, the best destinations, the underrated destinations, the things that travel has taught you, your favourite travel bugs, and a special celebrity guest each episode. And before we welcome our guest, who's a radio host, has been on TV since 1990, I have just discovered. Let's welcome New Zealand Herald Travel Deputy Editor and Trip Notes co-host Stephanie Holmes. How are you doing?
Tim, I'm good. How are you?
I am good. And sitting next to you is the lovely Stacey Morrison.
Welcome, Stacey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I mean, talking about travel, this is hardly hard. This is one of the best things.
It's like a little holiday in your day, I think.
It makes you maybe want to go somewhere immediately. Yeah. And I've got a son who's overseas. He's only 12. He's in Japan right now. So it's definitely in the family spirit.
Wow.
Voyagers and travellers.
Awesome. And you have inspired our destination of the week, which we'll get to at the end of the podcast, because this is exotic. It's the largest country in the world. And I'd say most Kiwis haven't been there, but you have. So we're very excited to do that. For travel bugs as well, we're going to look at the most common or maybe the most rip-roaring travel scams. But let's begin with finding out a little bit about you and what travel has taught you.
Yeah, I was reading an old interview with you, and I saw this amazing quote that you said.
Got me.
I know, well done. That you feel like being a New Zealander, there's a voyager spirit in you as a New Zealander. So do you think you were kind of predestined to love travel because of that?
I think all of us, that was my point, is that all of us as New Zealanders, we have the voyager spirit in us because we descend from or are someone who travelled to get here, no matter where that's from. So, for Māori, from Hawaii, I know my grandparents came from England, and this, a 6-week voyage on a boat, and you can't just turn around and go, no, 3 stars, don't want to be here.
No, can you imagine?
It's amazing. And yes, I do think it's a unifying sort of spirit of New Zealanders at our best. We are adventuresome, and I've always wanted to embrace that. And I was lucky that I started travel fairly early as an exchange student in Japan while I was still at high school. So that was my last year, my 7th form year, which is now year 13. Yeah. So I think starting early is part of it, and something I try to encourage with my children as well.
Yeah. How did you find Japan? Because in our first episode, we had the lovely Daniel Faitawa, and he also was a exchange student in Japan. And
Nerds unite.
Yeah. And he told us that it was his first trip overseas, and that he cried basically for the first 3 months because it was so out of his comfort zone and so overwhelming. Were you the same?
It is huge. I'd only been to Australia before that, and I was 17, but you didn't have email, you could barely ring your family, there was no social media like there is now. So that was part of it, just the homesickness, being so far away, immersed in a completely different culture. But I'm so grateful for it because that was my first opportunity to learn a foreign language. I learnt Japanese before I learnt Māori, and it really taught me a lot about my resilience. That's the other thing about travel. I like to sort of be a MacGyver type mama and to choose experiences over things. In general, that's a priority for our family.
What are some of the things maybe from that trip that were those kind of more MacGyver-y ones? Whether you were in a hot air balloon that was then pierced and then you had to tape it up with duct tape.
I mean, obviously that happened.
Yeah, that's just a standard week.
Yeah. But I mean, my host family took me everywhere. I lived in Utsunomiya, and that's about 100 km north of Tokyo in Tochigi-ken. And they took me to Hiroshima, to Kyoto. Being in the school environment, and we were really blessed and lucky. And I guess one of the things I really learnt was about resilience and how to look after yourself when you are homesick, when you can't be where you want to be right now. And so I'm really grateful for that because I think at 17 that's a good thing. And it's like an OE, I guess. We all have great parts of an OE and then things that are harder. So that's what I loved, but particularly with Japan because it's such a different culture.
Yeah.
And then even more so because it was the early 90s. There wasn't as much American influence. It really was being able to go to temples and be part of ceremonies that are completely different to our culture and yet had some resonance for me as well.
Yeah. And what about now? Like, you've got 3 children. Traveling must be quite different for you than, when you're carefree days when you can just take off and do whatever you like.
Well, you don't appreciate it then because you don't know what it could be like.
Yeah.
someone was saying to me yesterday about, oh yes, we definitely want to go premium economy to America. I go, America's nothing. Come on, I've held a child in my arms all the way to London in economy class. So I always think about it and say to the kids as well, it's just one day out of our lives and look at what we get at the other end.
Yeah.
So, for instance, in Turkey, when we took the kids there, and my husband tours a lot with Moana and the tribe, so as a performing band. So we have these incredible experiences. And I remember I had quite a small baby. I had 2 kids and at the time, and I've now got 3. And so she was in my backpack, and we were on a bus and there wasn't any seatbelts. So this is not ideal.
Yeah.
So I made her go in the backpack, and then I strapped it in the best I could so that it was a makeshift kind of car seat, and then cooled her bottle down in snow and all of those things, and they was calling me MacGyver mama. But then on the streets of Turkey, I remember in Istanbul, so we had about a 3-year-old and a 18-month-old, and everyone was so fascinated with the children. And when I looked around, I realized there's not many kids on the street in Istanbul. And so they were always coming up to them and pinching their cheeks and saying this one phrase to them. And so I said to our guide, what are they always saying to the kids, that phrase? And they said, oh, they're telling your kids they're ugly. I said, they are what? and she said, no, this is a good thing in Turkish culture. You tell beautiful children they're ugly so that the genies don't know they're beautiful and come and steal them.
Oh, wow.
Okay. That's a good explanation just as well.
Yeah.
She was lucky. But, the nice eye and everything, the protection, people were coming up and giving them things. It was really beautiful.
Yeah.
So thinking about the things that you learn when you travel, that sometimes, talk back when you speak with people who seem like they're really angry and racist, and you don't want to be sort of patronizing about it, because I always feel like travel is still kind of a privilege. But I feel like these people haven't seen the world. I mean, do you think that kind of Mark Twain idea that travel is the best way to ward off essentially, bigotry and racism.
Xenophobia. And I think it is important to be challenged and to see why people are like they are. Say in Japan, one takeaway I got from that was they have a different sense of personal space, because you don't have the luxury of choosing how far away you sit from someone on a Shinkansen. You have to be right in their space, and they don't perceive personal space in the way that New Zealanders do, which is just like our country. We've got a good amount of space, thank you, and keep away. And so that actually impacts your everyday experiences, because in New Zealand, if there is a free seat next to us, we expect that no one will take that seat on a bus or train unless they absolutely have to, whereas in Japan it's just survival. So I do think that experiencing other cultures helps us be more tolerant, and also when you're when in Rome or when in Hawaii, do like they do, and also connections. I mean, in Hawaii, what we discovered is that we would speak Māori and they would speak Hawaiian, and in between there was enough that we could understand each other.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the Hawaiian language is still very much threatened and in a hard place, but we were going to places like the school Kamehameha and Mauna Kea, their sacred mountains and those kind of things. So we were lucky enough to meet people, and honestly, even their ceremony, how their, we call them tuahu, but sort of their ceremonial structures are the same as ours, know. So you see likeness, but also appreciate difference. And I think another thing that travelling does is it helps you define what you consider to be you. And so when you go to London and see these New Zealanders busting out tūtira mai ngā iwi, you go, that's great. You realise that's part of who you are as well. So that's what I love as well.
That's
do you
great.
find, because you learned Māori as an adult, so do you find that it's being bilingual, you can pick up other languages a bit easier when you go away?
And it's really good for comebacks. People on Twitter who go, there's no point in learning Māori because no one else can speak it. Well, actually, people are fascinated around the world when they hear you and they go, hang on a minute, that's another language. And they ask about it and they engage with it. We always get the kids to learn to use as much as we know of that local language. So when we were in France, the same trip as the Turkey one, we're getting the kids to use whatever French we knew. And my daughter said to me, she said, oh, my friend at school at Puna, she doesn't understand Māori. I said, yes, she does, because I've heard her. And she's saying to me in Māori, she goes, Kauna te mea ki o komo sa va, kari e marama. So it's like, I said, komo sa va, and she didn't understand.
That's a nice hybrid.
Yeah. So it's, I guess, we enjoy language and celebrate language, and it's just such a good opportunity. And you have to be brave to use French in France, right?
Yeah, I know, because I still have this bad tendency that particularly with a language like French, that if you really put the effort in to say it right, I feel self-conscious. And I know that that's silly, but I feel like it's kind of putting on a show, and I've got to get past that, because I feel more comfortable saying it in
So you'd
my
rather say
dorky accent.
merci rather than merci?
Yeah, if I really went, meh, I feel shy. I feel embarrassed. How do I get
Place
past
to
this?
do it. I mean, it's fascinating, and again, it goes back to being in New Zealand and isolated. How challenged are we? How resilient are we to give languages a go?
Yeah.
And I guess that's what's helped. And with Japanese and with Māori, I've built up some language resilience, but also fascination. I just love hearing different languages. I remember we went to Disneyland a couple of years ago, and we were playing The Floor is Lava in Māori. And this guy with it, literally as American as you could get, with a fanny pack on and everything, he went running. We were going, "Hatahe puia te papa, the floor is lava." And he went running and jumped on top of a rubbish bin. He said, "You guys said the floor is lava, right?" So if he can pick it up, it's
good.
also about communicating. Yeah. And I think you can do that when you open up your ears and your heart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thinking of some of the places you've been, surely you must have had some sort of travel scam, and if you haven't, then you're incredibly lucky, because this is where we move into our Travel Bug segment, which is a weekly column I do in the Herald, and it's a weekly ode to the joys of moaning about your holiday, and sometimes being scammed is horrible, and sometimes it's kind of funny. But for you, have you ever
no
been
doubt.
scammed?
Thailand, Vietnam, you pay way too much for things.
Yeah.
I'm useless at bartering. I
hate
hate it.
Me too. It just feels so uncomfortable, and just I
It's
don't
so
want the
awkward.
hassle. I just want to buy something and just go. And I don't care, I just want to buy something that I'm happy to pay for, and I don't want to.
And you feel rich in that moment, right? So in China as well, we had Chinese people with us, and they were saying, "No, don't pay that." And then the Chinese who were working the market said, "You're Chinese, you shouldn't be helping them, these foreigners." And she said, "No, I'm a New Zealander." And he said, "Well, your parents were Chinese and you shouldn't be doing this." And I'm just like, "I'll just pay. I don't care."
Yeah.
I'm not good.
Yeah.
I probably paid too much in taxis. I've paid too much for clothes.
Taxis. I guarantee the first day I'm somewhere new, I will always get ripped off by a taxi. It's like just my part of my holiday.
Do you have any ones you can think of in particular? Any scams that you've suffered from?
I mean, I don't know. I guess it was a scam in Borneo, and I had arrived and I was horribly jet lagged, but trying to walk around and, stay up for as long as possible to have a good night's sleep and feel good the next day, and walked too far, got a bit lost, decided to get a taxi back. And I knew I'd read somewhere that you either fix the price before or you get the meter running, and I couldn't remember which one it was. And I didn't have Wi-Fi, so I thought, you maybe fix the price before you go. So I agreed this price with this guy, and I knew it was way too much. It was maybe 5 times more than I should be paying. And then I got back to the hotel, and he lifted his hat, and his hat was hiding the meter, and the meter showed that it was way cheaper. And I just always feel, it makes me feel really upset, that you've been conned, but I'm trying to just be philosophical about it.
You can be upset at yourself too. I had one in Vietnam, in Hanoi, and I got ripped off about, I think in the end it was about $60 US. But the ride from, at that time when I was there, the ride from the airport to the hotel was meant to be about 10 US. And literally in the Lonely Planet, I was holding as I was being essentially mugged by a guy who had come up to me in the airport. He was wearing what looked like a uniform. He said, "Do you need a taxi?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I was like, everything I did wrong. I said, "I need to get some notes out. I need to go to the ATM." So I'm at the ATM and getting big notes. $50 note comes out. And anyway, then we get in the cab, and he's not the driver. He's the co-pilot. My bag is in the boot, which is another bad thing, because then you can't escape. And as we're driving along, we pull off to the side of the motorway, and he says, "Right, there's a toll." And I've got the Lonely Planet saying, "Beware of the scam that says there's a toll." Right. There is no toll. So I said to him, "It says here there is no toll." He's like, No, that's an old book. I was like, "It's the new book." It's the new book. And then so I think, okay, well, I'll just give him some money to shut him up. And I opened my wallet, and he leaned back and he took out a 50. And I was like, I've just been robbed. And I was like, you've just robbed me. And he's like, no. And then, anyway, we eventually keep on driving. And then he starts wanting to make chit-chat about New Zealand. He's like, oh, so what's New Zealand like?
You're not my friend now, buddy.
You've robbed me. We're not making small talk about New Zealand.
Yeah. I think the important thing, though, is to kind of just put it in perspective. And as long as no one's got hurt, as long as you get away safe, you shouldn't really feel too bad about it, and just use it as experience, as a learning. And
that's what I mean. Check your privilege.
Yeah.
Because if it is 15 more New Zealand dollars and you've got that and you're not on a really tight budget, it's either be staunch or lose a little bit of money in those situations.
Yeah.
It's amazing, though, where you've been, that you didn't have, apparently one that's quite common in Istanbul, various parts of the world. Someone, and I love this one, someone will squirt you with fake bird poo and then they will offer to clean it up while their friend is, lifting stuff out of your bag.
There's all kinds of ones, aren't there? Like in Paris, and someone asks you to sign a charity petition, and then while they're doing that, you get picked. You just have to be aware. And tourists get scammed in New Zealand as well. We can't be righteous, because people get scammed when they come over here. So I think you just have to be sensible and just make sure you're safe. And
bum bags are back, so that you can, in terms of your personal security and how you're holding
shorts.
things.
I'm not happy about this, but yeah.
I think the ones in Thailand are the funniest, because it's oh no, the temple's closed, and so they want you to go to somewhere else, and then they can get your money to take you to the other temple. And so long as you know that, you can say, I know the temple's not closed, and you can kind of have a laugh, and then they laugh, and then lo and behold, the temple's not closed.
Yeah.
And all the layers in Shanghai of the not fake stuff you're trying to buy, and they go, okay, you're such a good bug, I will take you to the real place, which is another room in the back room. And and our Chinese host was saying, you got to be careful in here, okay, so don't just go off by yourself, and all of those things, and you've got to respect their how entrepreneurial they are,
tenacity,
and I mean,
I love them.
And let's not just keep it to that part of the world. Las Vegas, that's a total rip-off.
Yeah.
And they go, okay, here's $20 and here's all you can drink, and it's a you're supposed to share this big glass at the Magic Mike show. This is my sister
we need
and
to talk
I.
about that.
Yeah, it was amazing. And the thing about it is that it's watered down. You can taste it. It's got water all the way through it. So it depends what you consider a scam. There are levels of ripping people off all around the world.
Yeah.
Okay, very quickly, before we get to the destination of the week, seeing as you expressed an interest in this, the Magic Mike show.
In Vegas, yeah.
Well, it wasn't my idea, but my sister chose it, and I was ever so grateful. And funnily enough, we actually decided spontaneously to renew our vows that day. So we both remarried our husbands and then took off to the Magic Mike show.
I feel like you should have done that first, like kind of a hens.
It was a hens in reverse, but I'm 12 years in. I love you, darling. Bye. And so it's just so well designed. That's what I appreciated, the art.
Sure, yeah. Nothing to do with the topless man.
Was Channing there?
Channing wasn't, but the spirit of Channing was.
Were they as handsome as Channing?
They were very good dancers.
Okay.
They were, and singers. That's the thing. They sort of, I could talk about this for quite a long time, but it's just really well designed. And then they have a plant in the studio, and the women were screaming. It's just very, very clever.
It sounds like fun.
All right, let's get to our destination of the week, largest country in the world, and something like, here we go. I've got the fun facts. 142 million people.
Wow.
And I think something of a mystery to much of the world too. And this is Russia. And you have been. Where did you go? What was it like?
Moscow, and it was amazing, again, because of one in the tribe. So my husband was performing there. We were staying at the New Zealand Embassy, and at that time the ambassador was Stuart Pryor, who's still a lovely friend. And so we were so fortunate, this incredible embassy. So cold though, you could barely go outside, and we did Red Square, we did all of that. And actually my husband's been back again. He went to Vladivostok and St. Petersburg, a few different places, but it also gives you an insight into why, Russian people who live here, my friend Yelena, I went, okay, I get it now. I get where she comes from, what it's like. It's I guess quite, if you think about places like countries you've been to, you usually see colours and imagery, or get a sense of, you think of Thailand, you can feel the heat. In Russia, it is intensely cold, when we were there, but I guess the colours are like that too. At that point, they were quite grey. But then you go into this incredible strip. It's like better than Las Vegas, I'd have to say. Casinos everywhere.
Really?
And so there's loads of money and then abject poverty.
Yeah.
And we were involved in, because there was quite a lot of cultural side to things, saw a billionaire launch his book inside the embassy, and he had a harem of women who were just, all looked like supermodels, something out of Addicted to Love, Robert Palmer video. They did.
Really?
But he couldn't deal with the fact that, two Māori men were there with their tops off doing haka and all the women were fawning. That was his own version of Magic Mike.
Yeah.
And so he just had a big sulk, turned the lights off and left.
Male.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
What about the practicalities? Like, was it quite hard to get there, like getting a visa and things like that? Was that difficult?
I mean, it was definitely easier if you're staying at the embassy.
Sure, they would have helped out quite a lot.
Yes,
there,
yeah. And so it wasn't inconvenient for me. But, as a performer, you need to have connections. And one of the connections there was a New Zealander who's high up in the banks. Basically, it wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had an official invite. I guess sort of similar to China. It's not easy to just roll on up. From what I can tell, except it was easy for me. Typical. I just end up in these places. Well, you did what? But so yeah, quite austere, but gorgeous and resilient. I really got a sense of the resilience of Russian people, and how beautiful the architecture is, how they feel about their country and their history. Very invested in how they got to be what they are.
What would you say as far as Russian tourists don't have a great reputation around the world? Like in India, the locals can be very wary of Russian tourists. We were talking about scams, like frequently pretending they've gotten confused about something that was 1,000 rupees being 100 rupees, which then becomes a decent price to next to nothing. And those stories are everywhere in places like Goa. How do you contrast that reputation internationally with the Russians you met when you were there?
I guess just seeing an insight into, I was saying experiences over things. It has to be the things that you have and the show that you have, because they can't have other experiences. They're living, these modelly looking women apparently live in tiny little apartments. And so that's everything they have is everything that they're wearing. So I guess about surviving and trying to get through society is part of why they're used to going for the best deal, whereas we're sitting there cringing in the market. They're going, no, I have to get the best deal, because it's survival of the fittest, very much. Big country, huge population, strict kind of environment and culture. Then there's just a lot more discipline than we can perhaps relate to in New Zealand.
What about the food? I'm always very keen to know about food and destinations.
I seem to have a lot of salmon. I don't know why.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking cabbage. That's probably not a very fair.
There was a bit of cabbage, to be fair. But cabbage can be done well.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
No, it was interesting. I do remember vodka, a lot of vodka.
Remember the vodka? That's good. That's a good sign.
I do love vodka. I think my love of vodka has come from there. And so, but drinking it neat, having toast to everything all through lunch, which is...
starting early.
I couldn't... Oh, yeah, but not being affected by it.
Really?
I mean, I know on one of them, my husband, he said, we would have had 12 shots during the course of lunch. And he said, me and another guy who think we do okay here in New Zealand, we can't handle any more, and eating through it. So I found it, I don't have a big food capacity, so I was trying to be polite the whole time, but I couldn't keep up with what they were trying to offer as hosts anyway.
Is there a lurking sort of sense of humour that once a few shots of vodka have been consumed, that you go, okay, you're sort of serious on the exterior, but I can see kind of a warmth coming through with
I just love how yes, it's quite direct.
Yeah.
I remember one party they wanted to finish, so they just turned off the lights. That means go home.
That's such a good tip for when you've got people around for dinner and you want them to get out of there.
Turn off the lights. Yeah, definitely, and warm and really hospitable, and generous, and I of spirit. So yeah, I think. Yes, and spirits.
Yeah.
So I think, that it is hard for us to understand how hard it might be living in some of these places, but, in Russia, and how people really have to be strong and stand up for what they need and want and what they can get. But I did find that there's definitely those senses of humour. It's also fascinating to me then, the Voyager who comes to New Zealand, I mean, what a difference. It's huge. And the things that people value are very much impacted by how you grew up and what's important in the place where you grew up.
Yeah.
And the Russian birthday cake, that's the best thing in the whole wide world.
Excellent.
Oh my gosh. Amazing.
Yeah. I just think of the paradox of, Red Square, which is the most fantastical looking place, one of the most outrageous pieces of architecture. And then also our idea of Eastern Bloc architecture, which is very, very drab. But then there's St. Petersburg, which is meant to be so stunning. Again.
Well, we one of our travel magazine team members, Courtney, shout out Courtney, she actually went there last year on her honeymoon as part of a world kind of trip, and I was kind of a bit confused. Why would you pick Moscow and St. Petersburg for your honeymoon? But she said it was one of her favourite places, and she talked about the metro stations. Did you go in any of those in Moscow?
Yeah.
She said they were just like opulent and
that's
amazing,
right. Yeah,
stunning. But and this is just their metro. This is just their commute to get to work, and yeah, she said it's a really easy place to get around, and all these stereotypes that I had of this place, and just completely challenge them.
Yeah, so. I think once you're there, maybe, or depending how you go there. But I didn't get to St. Petersburg, but my husband and the rest of the crew did, and they said it was absolutely gorgeous.
Wonderful.
So, and as you know, it is important. Your public transport looking pretty.
Yeah,
that's your face to the world.
Exactly. Yes. Good advice. Stacey Morrison, thank you so much for coming by.
Is that the end already?
It is. I know it goes by fast.
So let's go and have a chat about Magic Mike.
Please.
Okay?